for many of us that the physical body is in truth but a vehicle or garment of the real man. He permanently sheds it at death, but he also sheds it temporarily every night when we go to sleep. In fact, the process of falling asleep consists of this very action of the real man in his astral vehicle slipping out of the physical body. I repeat once more that this is not a mere hypothesis or ingenious supposition. There are many among us who are able to perform, and perform every day of their lives, this elemental act of magic in full consciousness, who pass from one plane to another at will, and if this is clearly understood, it will become apparent how grotesquely absurd the ordinary and unreasonable assertion that such a thing is utterly impossible must seem to them. It is like telling a man that it is impossible for him to fall asleep, and that if he thinks he has ever done so, he is under a hallucination. Now, the man who has not yet developed the link between the astral and physical consciousness is unable to leave his denser body at will, or to remember most of what happens to him while he is away from it. But the fact is, nevertheless, that he leaves it whenever he sleeps, and can be seen by any trained clairvoyant hovering over it, or wandering at a greater or less distance from it, as the case may be. The undeveloped person floats, as a rule, near his physical body, scarcely less asleep than the latter, and comparatively formless and incipient, and it is found that he cannot be removed from the immediate vicinity of that physical body without causing him serious discomfort, which would, in fact, awaken him. As man evolves, however, his astral body becomes more definite and more conscious, thus becoming a more suitable vehicle for him. In the case of most intelligent and cultured people, the degree of consciousness is already very considerable, and a spiritually developed man is as fully himself in that vehicle as in this denser body. But although during sleep he is fully conscious on the astral plane, and can move freely there if he wishes, it does not mean that he is ready to join the band of helpers. At this stage, most people are so absorbed in their own line of thought, usually a continuation of some line taken in the waking hours, that they are like a man in a brown study, so absorbed that he pays practically no attention to everything going on around him. And in many respects it is well that this is so, for there are many things on the astral plane that might be bewildering and frightening to one who did not have the courage born of full knowledge of the true nature of all that he is about to see. Sometimes a man gradually awakens from this condition, awakens to the astral world around him, so to speak, but more often he remains in that state until someone who is already active there takes him in hand and awakens him. This is not, however, a responsibility to be undertaken lightly, for while it is comparatively easy to awaken a man on the astral plane, it is practically impossible, except by a most undesirable exercise of mesmeric influence, to put him to sleep again. Before, therefore, a member of the band of workers thus awakens a dreamer, he must be absolutely certain that the man's disposition is such that he will make good use of the additional powers which will then be placed in his hands, and also that his knowledge and courage are sufficient to be reasonably sure that he will suffer no harm as a result of the action. The awakening thus realized will place the man in a position to join, if he so desires, the band of those who help humanity. But it should be clearly understood that this does not necessarily or usually bring with it the power to remember in waking consciousness anything that has been done. That capacity has to be attained by man for himself, and in most cases it does not come until years later, perhaps not even in the same lifetime. But, happily, this lack of memory in the body in no way prevents work outside the body, so that, except for a man's satisfaction in knowing during his waking hours what work he has been engaged in during his sleep, it is not a matter of importance. What really matters is that the work is done, not that we remember who did it. Chapter 6. A timely intervention. However varied this work on the astral plane may be, it is all directed to one great end, the furtherance, in whatever humble degree it may be, of the processes of evolution. Occasionally, it is connected with the development of the lower realms, which it is possible to accelerate slightly under certain conditions. Our leading adepts clearly recognize their duty toward these lower kingdoms, elemental as well as animal and vegetable, for in some cases their progress only takes place through their connection with or utilization by man. But naturally, The greater and more important part of the work is connected with mankind in one way or another. The services rendered are numerous and varied, but they relate mainly to the spiritual development of man, physical interventions, such as those related in the first part of this book, being very rare. They do occasionally occur, however, and while it is my desire to emphasize rather the possibility of extending mental and moral help to our fellow men, it may be well perhaps to give 2 or 3 instances in which friends personally known to me have rendered physical aid to those who urgently needed it, in order that it may be seen how these examples of the helper's experience fit in with the accounts given by those who have received supernatural help. Such stories, I mean, as are found in the literature of so-called supernatural occurrences. In the course of the recent rebellion in Matabeleland, one of our members was sent on a mission of mercy, which may serve as an illustration of the manner in which help has occasionally been rendered on this lower plane. It seems that one night, a certain farmer and his family in that country were sleeping peacefully in supposed safety, not realizing that only a few miles away, relentless hordes of savage enemies were on the prowl, maturing diabolical plots of murder and rapine. Our associate's task was to awaken the slumbering family somehow or other to perceive the terrible danger that so unexpectedly threatened them, and she did not find it at all easy. The attempt to impress upon the farmer's brain the idea of impending danger failed utterly, and as the urgency of the case seemed to demand vigorous measures, our friend decided to materialize long enough to shake the housewife by the shoulder and urge her to get up and look about her. The moment she saw that she had succeeded in attracting attention, she disappeared, and the farmer's wife has never been able to find out from that day to this who of her neighbors so opportunely awakened her, thus saving the lives of the whole family, who but for this mysterious intervention would have been slaughtered in their beds half an hour later. She cannot even now understand how this needy friend managed to get in when all the windows and doors were so securely locked. Being awakened so rudely, the housewife was inclined to regard the warning as a mere dream. Nevertheless, she got up and looked about her, only to see that all was well, and it was fortunate that she did so, for although she found nothing unusual inside, she had scarcely opened a blind when she saw the sky red with a distant conflagration. She immediately roused her husband and the rest of the family, and thanks to this timely warning, they were able to escape to a nearby hiding place just before the arrival of the horde of savages who destroyed the house and ravaged the fields, but did not get the human prey they expected. You can imagine the feelings of the rescuer when she read in the newspaper, some time later, an account of the providential deliverance of this family. Chapter 7. The Angel Story. Another case of intervention on the physical plane which occurred a short time ago makes a very beautiful little story, although this time only one life was saved. It needs, however, a few words of preliminary explanation. Among our group of helpers here in Europe, there are 2 who were brothers long ago in ancient Egypt, and who are still very much attached to each other. In the present incarnation, there is a great difference in age between them, for one is in the maturity of life, while the other was then a mere child in the physical body, though an ego of considerable progress and promise. It naturally falls to the elder to train and guide the younger in the occult work to which they are so sincerely devoted, and as both are fully conscious and active on the astral plane, they spend most of the time during which their grosser bodies are asleep, working together under the direction of their common master, and rendering both the living and the dead such aid as is within their reach. I will quote the story of the particular incident I wish to relate from a letter written by the elder of the 2 helpers immediately after it occurred, for the description therein is more vivid and picturesque than any third-person account could be. We were engaged in other business when Cyril suddenly cried out, "What is that?" For we heard a terrible cry of pain or fright. In a moment we were on the spot and discovered that a boy of about 11 or 12 years of age had fallen down a cliff to some rocks and was badly hurt. He had broken a leg and an arm, the poor fellow, but what was even worse was a terrible cut on his thigh, from which a torrent of blood was gushing. Cyril shouted, "Let's help him quickly or he'll die." In emergencies of this kind you have to think fast. It was clear that 2 things had to be done: stop the bleeding and get physical help. I was obliged to materialize Cyril or myself, for we wanted physical hands at once to tie a bandage, and besides it seemed better that the poor boy should see someone on his side in his trouble. I thought that, Although he would doubtless be more at ease with Cyril than with me, I could probably procure help for him more easily than Cyril, so that the division of labor was obvious. The plan worked to perfection. I materialized Cyril instantly, he doesn't know how to do it himself yet, and told him to take the scarf from the boy's neck and tie it around his thigh, and twist a stick through it. "It won't hurt him much," said Cyril, but he did so, and the blood stopped gushing. The wounded boy seemed half unconscious and could scarcely speak, but he looked at the bright figure bending so eagerly over him and asked, "Are you an angel, master?" Cyril smiled so beautifully and replied, "No, I am only a child, but I have come to help you." And then I left him to comfort the sick man while I ran to fetch the child's mother, who lived a mile away. What it took me to get the conviction into that woman's head that something was wrong and that I must go and see what was the matter is incredible. But at last she put down the frying pan she was cleaning and said aloud, "Well, I don't know what is the matter with me, but I must go and fetch the child." When she set off, I was able to guide her without much difficulty, though at that moment I was holding Cyril with the strength of my will, lest the poor child's angel should suddenly vanish before her eyes. You see, when you materialize a form, you are changing matter from its natural state to another, temporarily opposing the cosmic will, so to speak. And if you take your mind off it for half a second, it flies back to its original condition like a flash of lightning. So I couldn't give more than half my attention to that woman, but still I carried her somehow, and as soon as she rounded the corner of the cliff, I let Cyril disappear. But she had seen him, and now that town has one of the best attested stories of angelic intervention on record. The accident happened early in the morning, and that same afternoon I visited, astrally, the family, to see how things were going. The poor boy's leg and arm had been mended, and the large cut bandaged, and he lay in bed very pale and weak, but was evidently going to recover in time. The mother had sent for a couple of neighbors and was telling them the story, and it was a curious story for one who knew the real facts. She explained in so many words that she could not tell what it was, but that something came over her in a minute, making her feel that something had happened to the child, and that she must go out and get him. How at first she thought it was silly, and tried to get rid of the feeling. But it was no use, she just had to go. She told how she did not know what had led her to go round that cliff more than anywhere else, but she did, and how as she turned the corner, she saw him leaning against a rock, and kneeling beside her the most beautiful boy she had ever seen, dressed in white and glittering, with rosy cheeks and lovely brown eyes. And how he smiled at her, so heavenly. And then in a moment he was not there, and at first she was so frightened she did not know what to think, and then suddenly she felt what he was, and fell on her knees, and thanked God for sending one of his angels to help her poor child. Then she told how, when she lifted him up to carry him home, she wanted to take off the handkerchief that was cutting his leg, but he would not let her, because the angel had tied it and told her not to touch it. And when she told the doctor about it, the doctor explained that if she had untied it, the child would have died. Then he repeated the part of the story the child had told him, how at the moment he fell, a lovely little angel had come to him. He knew it was an angel, because he knew there was no one in sight for half a mile around when he was at the top of the cliff just before. Only he couldn't understand why he had no wings, how she lifted him against the rock and tied his leg, and then began to talk to him and tell him he needn't be frightened, because someone had gone to fetch Mother, and she would be along presently. How she kissed him and tried to make him comfortable, and how her soft, warm little hand held him all the time, while she told him strange, beautiful stories that he could not remember clearly, but he knew were very good, for he had almost forgotten that he was hurt until he saw his mother coming. And how then she assured him that he would soon be all right again, and smiled and squeezed his hand and then somehow disappeared. Since then, there has been a great religious revival in that village. Their minister has told them that such a signal interposition of divine providence must have been a sign to them, to rebuke the scoffers and demonstrate the truth of the Holy Scriptures and the Christian religion, and no one seems to see the colossal presumption involved in such an astounding proposition. But the effect upon the boy had undoubtedly been good, both morally and physically. By all accounts he was formerly a rather careless young man, but now he feels that his angel may be near him at any time, and he will never do or say anything harsh or rude or angry, lest he should see or hear it. The one great wish of his life is to be able to see him again some day, and he knows that, when he dies, his beautiful face will be the first to greet him on the other side. A beautiful and pathetic little story. The moral which the people and their minister draw from what happened is perhaps a non sequitur. Yet the testimony to the existence of at least something beyond this material plane must surely do the people more good than harm. And after all, the mother's conclusion from what she saw was perfectly correct, although a more accurate knowledge would probably have led her to express it a little differently. An interesting fact subsequently discovered by the investigations of the author of the letter throws a curious sidelight on the underlying reasons for such incidents. It was discovered that the two boys had met before, and that some thousands of years ago, the one who fell over the cliff had been the slave of the other, and had once saved his young master's life at the risk of his own, and had been set free in consequence. And now, long afterward, the master not only pays the debt in kind, but also gives his former slave a high ideal and an incentive to the morality of life, which is likely to change the whole course of his future evolution. So true is it that no good deed ever goes unrewarded by karma, however tardy it may seem in its action, that though God's mills grind slowly, yet they grind very little. Though with patience he waits, with exactness he grinds all. Chapter 8.